What happens when the director of Blade Runner 2049, the DP of Rogue One, the production designer of Arrival, and Hans Zimmer all work together on a project? You get Dune Part 1. Now imagine being the editor, Joe Walker, having to fit all of that craft into a tight 2 hours and 35 minutes. We're going to look at how he did it and why every second works as well as it does. First off, let's dive into Joe's process. He read the Dune book when he was asked onto the project, but he would force himself to not look back on it while working on the actual movie. When he started work on the film, he would edit the non-dialogue scenes first, and many of those barely changed from what we see in the final product. The dialogue scenes, however, were much more challenging, and some took over a year to be finalized. Joe's big thing is rhythm and making sure that every scene is building towards something. While many editors start with the wider shots and go chronologically to build up to the close-up shots for the big moments, Joe starts with the close-ups first and then edits backwards to the beginning of the scene. Whenever he's working on the timing of the shots before the VFX and sound work has been done, him and his team will record temporary sounds and make visual representations of the VFX. Like for example with the Hunter Seeker scene, before the VFX was done, he had no way of knowing the exact timing of the VFX. He created title cards that he warped with different perspectives to stand in and help him figure out when exactly he was going to cut. Another thing that Joe mentioned that he would do is that specifically whenever he was several edits down the line, his brain would always fill in the gaps of his mistakes. And so the way that he got around it is that he would take the footage and put it in black and white, and then he would horizontally flip it and then watch the edit back that way. And it was able to trick his brain into viewing it for the first time, and he was able to be a lot more critical of his work in order to get the desired outcome. One specific scene he talked about was the needle scene with Reverend Mother. The scene is pretty simple. Paul is being tested through pain to determine if he is going to be allowed to live with his growing powers. Well, it actually was one of the longest scenes to edit, taking well over a year to get the final cut. It started out strictly with just what happens in that room, and no matter what they would do, it just would not work. And so they ended up intercutting the whole thing with shots of Lady Jessica right outside the door as she's reacting to him in pain. She has some lines that talk directly to Paul while it's happening, and they also use inserts of his dreams while this is happening, and it's an effective use of associative editing that helps to bring stronger weight to Paul's actions and to motivate what he's feeling. This helps to bring all the scene together. Another scene he also talked about is when Paul and General Gurney are sparring. With how they filmed the scene, Josh Brolin would take several steps before striking, but Joe found in the edit, if he cut out all of the steps that he took, it made Gurney look a lot more fierce and like he was coming out of nowhere with every strike. In another scene, when Javier Bardem's Stilgar is introduced to the royal family, instead of cutting between every single person with every line and reaction like we often see in movies, we linger with Stilgar as he looks angry just past the camera, and then we're followed by some of the reactions. But it's also cut with a lot of wide shots. It almost feels like at any moment Stilgar could reach out and attack any one of them at any time. Joe also mentions one of his favorite shots in the entire movie is something incredibly simple. Lady Jessica is visibly anxious as she's commanding her servants to pack up before the big move off their planet. In an OTS shot, Duke Leto steps in and puts his hand on the back of her neck and comforts her. The sensory aspect of that shot really makes it shine for him. He makes it a very big deal that sensory shots are always used in the film and to make sure they're utilized as best as they can to help build that sense of immersion. Another thing that he did for sensory, he used the same shot that's used for the title card as like an overlay of flares over certain scenes, and for him that really provided this reminiscent feeling back when he was a kid and he'd close his eyes and you see like the sun blaring through your eyes, like that kind of feeling. With many of the scenes, there are multiple aspects happening at the same time. Like with the scene when Lady Jessica is talking to one of her servants, Joe breaks it down with what's happening in the foreground and the background. In the foreground, Lady Jessica receives a blade from one of her servants, but in the background, she is signaling to her guard to be ready. By cutting to the background shots very quickly, it brings tension to the scene as we learn what's happening, but it also makes Lady Jessica appear a lot more cunning and calculated. When it comes to cutting a scene, and specifically the dialogue, Joe utilizes the look in the character's eyes as the driving force. Many characters continue their lines, even if the camera isn't held on them, based on whichever one of their looks in that particular moment suits best. Joe also found that by holding on actors for beats before and after they talk in those brief moments of silence, it helps the conversations flow a lot more freely. He goes into a lot of depth on how holding onto a shot is harder to do, but it's a lot more effective and efficient, and it really lets the moment play out. A big thing that Joe loves to use are insert shots. It's pretty standard while getting coverage to get shots of the prod design to be able to show it off, but rarely are they used in the edit. Joe argues that as long as they set up a later callback, they add just as much weight for the audience. Like for example, early in the movie, we see Paul's vision of Jason Momoa's Duncan, Idaho being killed. We see an insert shot right after of his beetle on the ground. Later in the movie, when he's in the same room just before he's about to be attacked, he is looking at that same beetle. This brings a sense of doom to what is about to come. Joe also explains that there are many scenes that he describes as low dangling fruit they could very easily cut out of the movie because they're so short, but by keeping them in, you add so much layers to the movie. For example, there's a scene where Paul talks to the gardener about the royal palm trees and their importance. It's not a very long scene, but later in the movie, when the palm trees are being burned down, it makes it all the more devastating because of it. In another scene at the start of the movie, we see Paul looking at a model of a bullfighter in a bowl. It's only for a few seconds, and then we cut away. Later, while in an argument with his father, Paul talks about not wanting to be Duke and that his grandfather fought bulls for sport. Leto tells him that he died doing that. This establishes a theme that the bull being a haunting image present just before the Atreides family fails. Later in the movie, Leto tries to kill the Baron and looks up at insert of a bull, and he ultimately fails right afterwards. At the start of the movie, when Leto gets to Arrakis, Leto looks at an image at a bull on a tomb, and not long after, he loses complete control over the planet. On a rewatch, this makes the early scene with Paul all the more haunting. Even if you don't directly see the cause of it, it looms over the rest of the movie. By keeping all these moments in the movie, it brings so much more thematic depth to the story. It all comes down to making the best version of the movie he can for the audience, drawing them into the minds of the characters and making them care. He always keeps in mind editing is hijacking what the audience sees for several hours, and so we should be intentional with everything to not waste time. Whether it is intercut, a simple reverse shot, a long oneer, a use of associative editing, a quick insert, or a wide establishing shot. Every shot can convey weight and meaning with the right placement and motivation. And that understanding is what makes the editing of Dune Part 1 so fun to watch and impressive.